You're listening to the 4-Phase Cycle Podcast with your hosts, Dr. Alex and Megan of ZESTY Ginger. If you're looking to naturally balance hormones and learn how to work with your body instead of against it, you've definitely come to the right place. As a duo of an integrative MD and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and best friends, we use the 4 phases of the female cycle in combination with functional lab work and mindset practices to transform the lives of the women we work with.
We also have a whole lot of fun along the way. If you're new around here, it's best to start with season 1 before jumping around and plan to roll up your sleeves. Showing up for ourselves and enjoying our lives is what good health is all about. Just a quick reminder though, this information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making changes.
Hello, Alex here. We are going to get into some deep topics on this podcast episode today. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you. The team and I were recently celebrating how close we are to hitting 1 million downloads on the podcast. Megan and I never thought in a million years when we kicked this off that we would be here at this point. So thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful for each and every one of you that tunes into this, has been sharing the podcast. It is one of our most favorite things to do in terms of how we teach, right? We love getting on here and speaking with you and sharing ideas and then hearing back from you about them, right? When you take a screenshot and tag us and the aha moments that you're having, the takeaways, we love that because it allows us to think about what is best, serving you. How can we create content that is going to help you up level your own life, which is certainly what we're about and what our entire goal is for the podcast. So really, I cannot probably put into words the amount of gratitude that we have for each and every one of you, but please know it's there. And we really do feel like this is what our passion is, our purpose is. And the fact that we get to do it is one of our most, our biggest honors and one of our biggest blessings. So the fact that you participate in that with us and make it a reality, we appreciate you so much. All right, so I won't get before I tear up and get all emotional. We're going to talk about emotions actually today. And this has been a long time in the making because this is something that I've had a lifetime of unpackaging. And I will say up front that this topic is something that I'll circle back around to again later, probably in multiple different ways, because even though I am hitting a stride with this, I know that there's a lot more. And of course, that's always the case, right? But just know that you're seeing this in real time as I live it, as I unpackage it, and as I begin to transition from understanding something conceptually and knowing it from having lived it and experienced it and seen the physical outcomes, actual what happens in life. And that's when we get to turn around and share that. And certainly Megan and I love it when people do that for us so that we can see what they're experiencing and begin to know that for ourselves. So that's kind of the context for this conversation. I do not feel like I'm done with this. This is not something that I have mastered. And that's okay, because part of what we're going to talk about today is the concept of, what do things look like from the outside and what is really happening under the hood internally. So the podcast episode is going to be really on the subject of how I experienced emotionally and spiritually bypassing my internal space and how that kept me stuck. And now that I am unpackaging that, I can really start to see that things are beginning to unfold in this way. And so this is going to be chapter 1 of that. What is emotional and spiritual bypassing? What's interesting about this topic is that while we give this a name, at its heart, spiritual and emotional, especially emotional bypassing, is how society is set up, right? And I'll illustrate that. If someone that you don't know very well says, "How are you?" or "How's it going?" right? What do we fire off? "Okay, I'm fine. We're all good." Sometimes you get the little living the dream, right? The sarcastic. But really, we've all agreed in a general sense that for the most part, the polite societal thing to do is to not put all your crap out there. Therefore, it's kind of expected that you're just like, yep, good, sounds great. And inside, you could be like screaming. And from the outside, we put on the facade, and that's how we do things. Now, I think that's one side of the spiritual bypassing, in that we're saying our experience of ourselves and like the authenticity of who we are, and I capitalize each one of those, right? Who we are is then inauthentic because it's not accepted. You're not, it's not a good look to be like, I'm not having a good day. And you're like, I don't know you from Adam. And we'll talk about the corollary, because obviously there's a reason that things have happened the way they do, and that we've all agreed on this level. I'm also very happy that not in every single moment we all just share everything that's happening, right? There's discernment. And yet, we have to sort of toe the line then between those two, because you can start to swing the pendulum in either direction really hard. And I think we can all agree that what we want for ourselves personally is neither just pretending like everything's fine and being inauthentic, and we don't also want to go with every thought and emotion that we hold. Okay, so this is a discussion of the gray. So keep that in mind as we're talking. So if you're ever like, but yeah, I don't, I mean, generally, yes, I'm going to agree with you that we all don't need to be saying every single thing that comes to mind. However, I think that we can start to see how much things are sort of tied into how do you look from the outside, and how much does that shiny veneer match the internal experience. Because right, the internal experience, and we'll get to this later on in the podcast, the internal experience is what causes the stuckness or not experience, because there's nothing externally that is tied to, right? We can have the narrative of, I wish this was happening, or I wish this was unfolding. I'm totally with you. But really, it's internally that starts, because we know, if you don't want to be stuck, you could do something completely different, change, do something else, and all of a sudden be unstuck. The question is, are you available to do that kind of thing, or is not the right time? So that is one aspect of it. There's also, to build on that for spiritual bypassing, in the sort of spiritual community, for lack of a better word, where, and we love this, the concept of co-creating with the universe, and manifestation is another word that people use for that. Even just being empowered, right? Directing your own life. Again, we love this stuff. The NLP, neuro linguistic programming concept is, you can stand at the helm of your unconscious mind and program it to work with you. Again, we love all this stuff. The Joe Dispenza teaching, the quantum realm, right? Quantum leaps. We love all of this stuff. We nerd out about it. We think it's great. What seems to be happening and unfolding over time. Now, these ideas are shifting as we all shift and we all grow. And if you've been following that, like co-creating your life with the universe conversation the last couple of years, it has shifted. Something like Abraham Hicks, what the general information that's shared by Abraham Hicks has changed and morphed over the years, which is great because we're all changing. One common thing that tends to happen, and I do not believe this is has to be inherent in the teaching. Sometimes it is, depending on the person that's delivering it, and that's all person dependent. But oftentimes, what people end up hearing about that is they're like, whether it's brain based identity, I'm wiring that in, or who I'm being from a vibrational standpoint for co creation, or what is my unconscious mind doing and how can I interact with it. The cool part about all of that is it puts you in the driver's seat, which is why we love it. The flip side of it, though, is that because people get put in the driver's seat, whenever things aren't going according to plan, then there's a lot of you're not doing it good enough, you're not positive enough, your thoughts are too negative, you must be wallowing in your emotions. So now focus on, feeling good. And again, these concepts are true. Everything that I just said, there is truth to that, right? Because who we are being, what we are vibrating, is the key to living the experience that we want. My argument, or I don't even know if I'm making an argument, this is just what I've been mulling over and experiencing in my own life, is that when we artificially do that and are the level of our internal spirituality, right? What are we actually vibrating at? Is sometimes not matched. And we can really, like, this is what I experienced. I got so good at getting into that state in a certain way. Like, it felt to me like I was, yeah, I'm visualizing. Yeah, I know I was crying earlier, but now I'm feeling better and I did the things and I'm doing it. All of that is fine, except for what I was really doing was sticking on top of the things I had inside, these processes which work, right? Which is why I was like, hey, I feel better. But now this is like trying to take a right and take a left in your car at the same time. You're not going to get either one. You're either going to get somewhere off to the side or you're just going to keep going straight, which is what I was experiencing, right? So when it comes to getting into the vibrational state and all of that, there's often layers of it. And if all it was, yeah, I feel good now, and that was working and your life was unfolding exactly the way that you wanted to, great, right? But sometimes we don't experience that. Sometimes there's a mismatch. And then that's where I think just sticking on the happy face or, kind of moving your attention to the thing that you're focusing on without addressing the actual muck underneath the surface is where we can really start to almost, well, I won't even speak for everyone, but for me, I think I was convincing myself, like, yeah, this feels better. But underneath the surface, like, I was still waking up in the morning with that discontent that there's something not aligned. There is something going on underneath the surface. And the more that I'm like, oh, I'll journal more, I will, do this more, I'll do more belief work, I'll do more meditation, and I still do those stuff and I still love it. Do not get me wrong about anything, this isn't going away from those things. But essentially, what it came down to was that I wanted to skip more of the part of digging into what was actually happening and what I was experiencing from that spirituality standpoint underneath the hood, which was layers of emotions and energy, like stored energy inside my body, inside the system, and all of that showing up. And I really was buying into this concept of, if you're going to co-create, it's like you get into that state, you feel as if you already have it, and then with that, that's how you attract it. But then it makes it seem like if you actually acknowledge what's under the hood and you don't feel great about that, which once you get down there, it's not like it always feels awesome. I had this idea of like, now I'm actually co creating that muck more. And it made me want to, I'm like, I'll do a little bit of work and then I'll kind of go back to focusing on feeling good. And I do think that over time, it just prolonged how long it took me to work through that stuff because there was a lot of energetic traumas from this lifetime, childhood things that had happened to me, teenage stuff, even adulthood things, and then depending on what you conceptualize in spirituality, like who were you before you came to this lifetime, and whatever you believe in that, like what did you bring into this experience and how is that continuing to play out. So all of these things were still underneath the surface, and me denying myself processing them. I do believe that all of the good stuff I was doing, it just it could only surface level work, which is why I had the experience of my life felt stuck, even though a lot of the, if you videotape my life and you followed me around with the camera, you'd be like, hey, she's doing all the things, right? Why is that not shifting things? And this is really what I've come to think for myself, is that because I was like, how do I focus it on the positive more and more? I really was not allowing myself to acknowledge all of those very dense like imprints that I carried. And I'm going to talk about this more as after I talk about emotions because they end up merging together, is that a lot of times with physical body things and mental things, it's easier for us to talk about and navigate it because we have words and concepts of that in everyday society. It's just like a conventional thing, like here's what I think, right? Or here's what my thought process is. That's a fine thing to explain, and people listen and are like, okay. But for the most part, with emotions and especially energetic imprints, like how do you explain to someone the feeling you have left in your body of trauma, of being mistreated, of being gaslit? There's often not words that we have. And so then when people ask us about it, like, oh, why are you feeling sad? What's going on? It's even sometimes hard to explain that. And therefore, in our lack of being able to externalize it and explain it, we think, well, maybe that's wrong. Maybe it's like nothing and I should just kind of buck up, right? But unless someone has lived those things, and that's not to say they can't conceptually understand, but it's important for you as the person who is experiencing it to ask yourself, and this is what I had to do, of like, this person may be very loving and can very much conceptualize it, but the energetic imprint that event caused on me and the feeling that it leaves in me, like in the sensation and energy, I may not be able to explain that. Therefore, that insight from them of like what do they think I should do, or what do they think it's like, is always through that filter of them, right? And that's why these topics become much more difficult when you are in a place where society has disempowered you. So you're looking for authority, and then you go to authority, but you can't even explain the things going on internally to you because they're not mental. These are energetic, spiritual aspects of ourselves, and when we don't have the words and the person doesn't have that imprint, sometimes the things that we're going to be told to do are not matched to us, and that's not really anyone's fault. Like that whole chain, no one's at fault there, no one's to blame. But when you're the person seeking help, it really, for me, it was a big weight off to be like, this is what I'm dealing with. This is why I've had a hard time talking about this, explaining it, and sometimes the things that I reach out for coaching on or whatever, sometimes I have to ask, does this even match with what I'm feeling, or is this advice conceptually, wonderful and great, but not currently where I'm at, therefore not usable by me as a tool, right? It may be a thing that goes in my toolkit, and maybe I'll use it later, and but right now I'm unable to do that. And I think that that makes the experience, when we acknowledge that, it takes the charge off of some of the guilt and shame we then place on not even really being able to describe what's happening. And then oftentimes we have beliefs around that. Well, if I don't have a good reason, then why am I moping around? Or if I don't have a good reason for feeling this way, or I can't explain it, why, it's not really anything. And so we almost gaslight ourselves. And I've had multiple episodes on this on the podcast, so we won't go into gaslighting yourself too much here. But really important subject of, starts with you, but then it gets more complicated with other people, right? Because then you have not only your perception of what's going on, now you have to worry about what are they thinking and telling you to do or weighing in on, and then you have to respond to that. So it just adds more and more layers. But really it starts with, at first, you saying, I feel this way. I don't even have to be able to explain it. This is just what's going on. And sometimes in my own head, I have to be like, it's this sensation in my chest right here, and it's linked with the fear. And it's that fear, it's the fear I feel of, what if this world is unsafe, right? Or fill in the blank. And sometimes I don't even have that clarity. It's just that something nails on the chalkboard. And I had a really hard time sitting with that. So that's why this podcast episode is getting made, to really just even be like, I feel it, therefore yes, it's habit. Just like if I had a headache, I would have no problem being like, I have a headache, right? The same thing is here. And I don't have to explain it to anyone, but to me, I'm like, this is what I feel in this part of my body linked to this thing, and that's all it is, period. I will circle back around to some tools that I use for this stuff. So hang tight with me as I kind of unpackage the topic and then what I actually do about it. And then emotions. Okay, so emotional bypassing. Holy cow, this one is even more obvious in our world, right? Because the whole big boys, big girls don't cry thing, the you don't want to show emotion in certain settings. A lot of us grew up as women are not intended to be powerful. That's not their role. There was, sometimes we grew up with distant parents, right? Parents who had depression or really bad anxiety or traumas themselves, who are not emotionally available to us. And so we emotionally match them, right? If some of us are so keyed into people's facial expressions that it's like one little twitch of an eyebrow, and it's like, oh, that anger is coming up. And then the programmed response is to sometimes transform yourself into the solution so that you can keep the peace and keep everything kind of steady, right? And so it's all of these experiences, whether we say we're fine when we're not, and we say, oh, it's okay when someone hurt us, instead of saying, no, that actually really did hurt us. Or you really just, it was a survival mechanism of fitting into the environment so that you were kept safe. No matter what that looks like, most of us have had experiences where we bypassed our emotions. And emotions, unlike even, we commend people for thoughts in a way, right? Like to write an opinion piece is something that's accepted as like, experts write opinion pieces, whereas most people don't write emotion pieces. Right? This is just not a concept that we have had a lot. Thankfully, this is changing, but for the most part, it's like slap a smile on your face, act like you're okay, and then we're good, right? The rest of us don't need to worry about you having your emotions so that we could feel better, so that we don't have to deal with our own emotions. And on it goes. And for the most part, what Megan and I see working with women and within ourselves is how when you haven't done that, how difficult it can be, and how proud that, and this is my opinion, how much pride you can have from becoming a person who didn't used to feel their emotions and now allowing yourself to do that. Because when we start feeling our emotions instead of bypassing them, we realize how uncomfortable sitting with them can be, right? It's sometimes like unbearable and incredibly painful. And so this whole concept of emotional bypassing, it's been conditioned to, oh, don't do that. And especially, you can have a day or you can have a week, you can have a couple months if something happens of emotional processing. But then all of us need you to move on, right? Everyone's like, wrap it up. We got it. You're sad. That happened. Time to get over it, right? And that's kind of what happens. And we do that to ourselves too. Like, gosh, it's been a week. Maybe I should get over it. And we love the ability to direct our attention and use our thoughts to guide emotional choices, right? This is the equivalent of like, yeah, you can feel good and step into the identity of the person who has already created the life that you want and manifest, co-create from that place. This is the same thing here. If an emotion right now is, you're in a place where you're like, this doesn't feel good, and I can authentically get to a better emotional state by putting on some music, reaching out and getting coffee with a friend, cool. That is not really what I'm talking about here. That's all just, that's great. As long as it's working and you're getting the results that you want, cool. But I think where many of us feel stuck is that we put the limits on what the emotional processing looks like. And if it's outside of that parameter, or if it gets too uncomfortable, goes on too long, blah, 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 fill in the blank for whatever you have, then we're like, it's no longer acceptable, right? So now there becomes multiple layers of, this is a difficult emotion. Maybe I don't even have a reason that this emotion is coming up that I know of. That's been happening to me a lot with stuff like repressed anger. I've never been an angry person, but part of that was I just didn't really allow myself to go there that much. There are times as I began to sit with my emotions, sometimes the anger comes up and I can't tell you what in my world happened. Like nothing happened, right? So if I were to go to someone and say I'm angry and they're like, oh yeah, what happened? I'm like, nothing, I'm just angry. Most people would be like, okay, well, but maybe you could just get over it, right? Like just nothing happened, just don't be. And again, if you can do that, great. And if you can't, then it becomes, is that invitation of like, just don't feel that way, is it serving you, or is this going to be the bypassing that keeps that anger, in my case, just kind of looping back around, stuck and repressed? Because I kind of peek it, I look at it, I'm like, still there, but I don't have a good enough reason, so I shove it back down. And that's where the stuckness can come. You keep shoving the stuff back down, it hasn't actually changed what's underneath the hood. And depending on what we've experienced in life, there can be a lot of things under the hood. And so this determination of, oh, it's been a week or it's been a day and I'm still not over it, do we really know up front how long it should take to process? Let's say you have childhood trauma. How would we make the determination of what's appropriate or not? How do you know what's under there until you've unpackaged it and taken a look? Right? So, what I'm really getting at with all of this is that it comes down to authenticity and intentionality. because there's always going to be the interplay of moving yourself in the positive direction in the way that you want to go, because that is standing in your own power. Megan and I talk about that all the time. So we absolutely agree that all of that stuff still applies and is true. The intention with which you do that, though, is really, in my opinion right now, what determines how successful that is, right? Because if the intention is, gosh, I'm really, I have this emotion, it's uncomfortable, I want to get out of it, therefore I'm going to do XYZ, the intention there is different in terms of honoring the emotion than I'm going to give myself whatever I need to process this emotion, and also ask myself at times, how can I support myself in feeling better in the process, right? That way you can still work through emotions, process those, and not get so stuck in them that everything seems like it sucks and the whole world's just going down and you're going to be stuck there forever. There's always going to be towing that balance. But if you hear the underlying themes of what I'm talking about here, it really does come back down to authenticity. What is actually true for you on an internal level, not what you want to be like, not only where you want to go, of course, that's super important, but what is authentically you right now. And there, if you had asked me a couple weeks ago, I've been like, authentic to me is I am angry at about a lot of things that have happened, angry at a lot of kind of some misconceptions that I have about my role here and a bigger portion of the world and the universe, right? All of these things, authentically, that's how I felt. And so to bypass that and say, I don't want to feel this anger, I'm going to visualize what I want, it wouldn't have actually processed the anger in any way. I would have just sort of superseded that and tried to stick a cover on it instead. And that really is what I was doing for a while, until I began to think about it in this new way and really say, what is actually going on inside, and the only person who can know that is me. Because if I can't even put things into words, there's no way anyone's a good enough authority on you to know that, right? So that portion, authenticity, and then intentionality. Why am I doing that? Because from this whole discussion, you can hear there are going to be times where you're like, yeah, I'm going to move my attention and focus on what I want. And then there's going to be times where, like, I'm processing now, this is where I sit with some of the darker things I maybe don't feel as comfortable with, right? The intentionality there then becomes the determinant of what that does for you and how effective that then becomes for creating the experience that you want. Again, the only person that can know that, though, is you, which is where, when we are running around looking for solutions to all of this from everyone else, sometimes it leads to just more ways to bypass things, right? As opposed to actually addressing it. And as someone who loves learning and loves picking up new tools, you can still do that. There's nothing actually stopping you, but the intentionality and the awareness of the authenticity is what determines then how you use your toolkit, right? So you don't have to stop doing anything. You just ask yourself better questions, really, from this, because this isn't what does Alex think or what does anyone else think. This is just what your experience would actually be on this and what is true for you. Right, so processes that. Now, there's lots and lots of ways to handle this, and of course, with something like our Health Transformation Accelerator program, we go through many processes that allow for physical, emotional, mental, spiritual processing, because in each of these areas of who we are, there's things that happen and processing that happens, right? And so I'm going to talk about two different ones for emotional processing and then spiritual, like energetic processing. For the energy processing, what I really like is to follow the sensations and offer them out of my body to an external source. So for you, it would be however you conceptualize a higher being or, system at play in the world. So for some of us, it could look like if there's anger coming up, wherever you feel it in the body. And so sometimes the emotions and the spiritual energy stuff come as a set. So even though anger is the emotion, for me, for example, I feel areas in my body where it's almost like that energy buildup has gotten stuck there. That is, that's where the energy and the emotions interface with one another, right? People say energy and motion is what emotions is. Well, when it gets stuck, that energy, not in motion, doesn't feel great. So bringing down like a pure white light, right? Source energy, and allowing as it bubbles up, so you're feeling the anger and feeling the sensation of whether that is, like for me it was partly in my pelvis, partly around my heart, partly in the back of my neck, right? I would feel it. And this is where I would say the light, I'm releasing these as I'm able to release it. Doesn't always all happen at once. In my experience, it doesn't usually happen at once. Is then kind of releasing that into it and letting it be recycled. Some people, from a more kind of religious standpoint of this type of thing, can pray about releasing these, right? So whatever, I'm not even making the case for what your spirituality and what your understanding of that is, because I don't think that for this topic it matters how you do it, right? Like, and for me, I think everyone should get to do what fits best for them, and therefore there's always a way to tailor it. But the process of feeling it and having it come up and then inviting it to be taken and to be released from you, right? It's like you're working with something, say, this is what I want, and then I'm being guided and worked with in a process. And some people, if there's not a higher power that you identify with, it can be you guiding it, right? You releasing it, you clearing it for you. So make it work for whatever framework that you have for that. But the process is virtually the same. Acknowledging it, feeling it, and then allowing it to be released in the authentic stages that it can be released. And sometimes you'll have it come up in multiple waves, at least that's what I've had. And every time as it comes up, I direct it, I let it come up, I feel it. That's the part that is uncomfortable. That's where you want to go. You're like, okay, I'll call a friend. Oh my God, I should check TikTok. Oh my gosh, I haven't checked my email, right? Like your brain will try to get you out of it to bypass it. Whereas really just saying, I see you, I feel you. Sometimes I understand where it's coming from, sometimes I don't. But it doesn't matter whether I know or not. If there's something I need to learn from it, it'll come up. And if there's nothing that needs to necessarily be consciously learned and it's just energy being released from whatever has happened to us in the past, then we invite it to begin to leave and exit and actually be processed. I've been doing this for a while in terms of energy work in general, and then doing it this way in terms of looking at it as if I was emotionally processing or even mentally, probably like if you've done pros and cons list, right? What are you actually doing? You're sitting with yourself and feeling into or like thinking about what your points are and organizing them. So it's a similar kind of thing, except for because it's not words we can organize on a page and it's more sensations in the body. That's where I think people are less clear on what that feels like. But as you acknowledge it, this is the essentially the internal act of putting it on paper, right? Saying, what is this? I'm not running away from you. I'm not trying to shift right now. I'm looking at what this is. And then as it comes up, what can I release? What can be processed now? And it's the same thing for like pros and cons. Sometimes you mark stuff out, right? You're just like, that doesn't apply anymore. Same thing here. And then sometimes what I have found is in doing that, you do kind of get little clues to how can that be different in the future. So if there's anger around never feeling heard, right? Maybe you had parents that didn't really listen to you or super critical, your ideas never really like got taken seriously or what you said wasn't important. With that kind of stuff, we as we release it and process it, we may be processing things that we felt when we were 4 and they did that, right? And now we're processing it, so sometimes there's not a thought, and sometimes that's where we start to have these instances in our lives that keep coming up where we're like, wow, I really should speak up for myself. Like that keeps happening, right? So now we can start to actually appreciate the interplay of, huh, I honor the fact that I have an energetic body and it needed some health assistance, right? Just like our body needs food. This is, it needed to work through some energy. Now I can begin to garner knowledge and information from that. And now it's actually helped guiding me in my life. Now I'm speaking up for myself. Oh, cool, that setting the boundaries is helping me feel safer, more supported for people in my life. And oh yeah, you know that dream that I have of podcasting, maybe I can go do that now. So see how just that alone, processing that, can have these ripple effects that now you are not feeling stuck in life, but you're moving along. The tricky part of that is that often we don't, it's not as clear as like writing things down on a piece of paper, because like it's your thoughts and then making a decision and going. Sometimes it's a little more nebulous because it is energy and it's not, if it was words it'd be mental, right? So from that standpoint, I think it gets a little murkier, but once you start to look for it and see it play out, this is where I had a big aha moment where I was like, holy cow, this is how it goes, right? If I don't release that and I'm like, yeah, let me become the person who podcasts, sometimes that energy will kind of keep holding us back or spinning our wheels because we haven't actually addressed it and released it and processed it, right? So that's how I've seen it play out. And same with emotions. So for emotions, one of the coaches that I've had, Padma Ali, she taught me about sitting with the child versions of myself as I have difficult emotions. So oftentimes with something like shame or unworthiness, guilt kind of thing, there was an event when we were little where that emotion was very strongly felt and sort of imprinted into that. And one of the most helpful, well, we have, there's a lot for emotions actually, but one of my favorites has been to kind of pull up when I have that emotion. How old was I when I first had that very powerful emotion and what was going on? Because then I'm acknowledging kind of the inner child part of myself, of that is still imprinted in me. That's where the authenticity portion of it comes from, right? That if it's still, you have that hurt, like I'm so scared of being rejected, right? We can do a lot to pretend like we aren't scared of being rejected, but likely that inner child self, whoever we were when we first felt very rejected, and maybe this is past life, right, or other life, depending on how you conceptualize all of this. If that's the case, then that can still get triggered when people then don't call us back, or they go talk to your friend but they don't come seek you out. Oh, why didn't they come talk to me? Right? It still keeps getting triggered because that part is like, I still feel rejected, right? Like that little kid part of you is still there. There hasn't been things that have shifted. That's where visualizing the part of myself as a kid feeling it, it's easier for me to sit with myself because I can visualize myself hugging the little version of me who's experiencing that and acknowledge that that is a part of me that's still feeling it. But because it's like a little kid self, I have a visual for that. I know exactly what I would do if one of Megan's daughters was sad, right? There's certain things that I would just immediately do to show that I'm there, that I'm, a support, I'm a safe space, because I have that concept, is then easier for me to apply it to myself and sit with myself. So sometimes that's like just really saying, I'm going to journal about how I feel, and I'm going to journal as if like I'm a kid and I'm telling this trusted adult all the things I'm feeling, and you get to use kid words instead of being like, oh, well, I can conceptualize that they did this because this. You're just talking like, how would a 5-year old say this? Like, I feel like they're mean to me, or I feel like they don't love me. You get to sort of put it all out there, and then from the adult standpoint, look at it and say, this is why I feel the way I do, and this is what drives the action sometimes, right? It's the putting, if you have a wound of rejection and that emotional energy is still there, then doing stuff like, oh yeah, just date, right? Those two are going to be at odds. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be successful dating and with that, right? That's not at all. But if something doesn't feel right and you don't like what's happening in the experience, sometimes the shoving it down and being like, just get on more dating apps or whatever, put yourself out there more, is the bypassing I'm talking about, rather than saying, the reason I act this way and whatever it is because of this. What do I need to give myself to process that kind of thing? Right. And some of the big things I've noticed for me take longer than what I have arbitrarily in my head decided is appropriate. Right. Because you're like, how long am I going to allow myself to sit with it? And after kicking and screaming and trying to dash around in all the different locations, what I have come to think now is that when there are emotions that are kind of our core wounds, like a lot of us have at the base of things like, we don't think that we're good enough, right? Or we're ashamed of who we are. The big things, right? When you get down there, depending how long you've been at it and the things that have happened to you, I think that we probably underplay how much is really there. Therefore, we underestimate how long it is reasonable to process for. So, how do you know then how to toe that line? Well, in my understanding currently for me, is that when I have been truly acknowledging and processing these things, along with all the great other things that we're talking about here. Yes, I focus on where I'm going. Yes, I do timeline work. Yes, I do belief work. Yes, I meditate. Yes, I do hypnosis. All of that stuff, absolutely not saying anything about that. But when it comes to really acknowledging what's going on and also doing things for that and just letting myself process and work through the things underneath the hood, that's where the day to day experience doesn't feel as rocky. Now, your external world may not change, at the drop of a hat, but the internal space, then, even with the dips, feels a little more like gentle of a ride. It's just not as bumpy, because what I found, it felt like a crazy roller coaster. You know those ones where it like shoots you up and then drops you down, but it's unpredictable. It's like an up and down thing, and they're circular and your legs dangle, and then they like surprise you with when they drop you and when they lift you back up. That's what that feels like. Like, for bypassing, to me, and again, yours may be different, but this is just so you have some context. That's what that feels like. Whereas even one of those like kiddie roller coasters, there's the ups and downs, but you're not getting like whipped around, because to acknowledge and process your own anger, like for me, the crazy whips up and down were me being like, no, I don't want to be angry. You're like, oh, just focus on this. Oh, now I am really angry, and like, why isn't this working, right? That felt really rocky. Whereas, like, hey, I'm in a period of time where I'm processing my anger. It's like that is true moment by moment. So whether I feel better or I feel angry, that is still just what is happening. There's not the whipped around sensation that I then have on top of that as I'm trying to navigate it. So it's not that it's smooth, it's just that it's more navigatable from like a well-being standpoint, and making tangible progress moving forward. Right? So those were the two: the really, feeling the energy, acknowledging it, letting it bubble up, and releasing it, whether it's white light or angels or God or however you conceptualize that. And then for the emotions, potentially asking, when was the first time that I felt this emotion very strongly? And then visualizing yourself at that age. What would you do to take care of that child if you are an adult now? So those were the two processes. There's lots and lots of options. So when you start looking into this, there's many ways to work with energy. There's many ways to navigate emotions. There's many ways to start to pull it all together with the physical and the mental body. I didn't focus on those here because we've talked about the physical and the mental body so much, right? You can rewiring the brain for thoughts. It's the corresponding emotions and the energy that not believing those thoughts, right? To say I'm healthy, it's not that your brain can't wire in I'm healthy. It's the fact that if what you feel internally is this like hot lava in the center of your chest, because that it hasn't been your experience, and you've gotten let down by doctors, and you're so ashamed of like, why can't you figure this out, even though you're a health coach yourself, or maybe like you're really accomplished in what you do but you can't figure this out for yourself, right? It's those things that prevent it. So yes, the physical and the mental, of course, that's important. We will never exclude those here as we talk about it. But these two, I think, are so much less commonly acknowledged and worked on that, from my take currently, I think this is where a lot of the discongruency comes from, and that's where stuckness can occur. All right, so this was a really meaty, long podcast. So thank you for hanging with me. I really hope that this brought up some nuggets for consideration, as you move forward, because I think a lot of us are in this place right now, and especially as the world transitions and we are asking ourselves, what do we want instead? You know, I think most of us, our goal is to get there as seamlessly and efficiently, joyfully as possible, right? And so, with that, making sure all of us comes together, which means we're taking care of and addressing all of us and not sidestepping, bypassing anything that we still have inside us that could get in the way, that could make the experience more bumpy. All right. I would love to hear what you have to say about this podcast episode. Please screenshot and tag me in your Instagram stories so that I can see what you have to say. I love it so much. So thank you for everyone who does it. Alrighty. I will catch you on the next episode. Bye.
Thanks for coming out to hang with us on the podcast. It is our goal to transform the way women are treated in healthcare. And we need your help. We need your help to get the word out. We have a lofty goal of 1 million downloads. And we know that as this podcast grows, we're going to be able to reach more women, get more amazing speakers for you, and bring the most cutting edge information.
If you found these podclasses helpful, please take a moment to text 5 women you know the link to the series. We appreciate your help so much. Can't wait to see you next time.